Hello everyone and welcome to another math tutorial video. Hope you're all doing well today, and in this one we're going to be dividing functions, which is IXL 03. So in this one, a little bit different than when we were adding, subtracting, or multiplying. So we get this question that is asking us, what is the domain of? Now the reason that's important is because when it comes to dividing, there are some math no-nos, basically. Of course, the biggest math no-no that we'll be seeing in this video here, or that you'll be doing in the skill, is that you cannot divide by 0. So we'll have to see what possibilities that we could have. Basically, we're going to be finding out what is not possible, because dividing by 0 we cannot do. So if I have f divided by g of x, f of x is negative 3x plus 3, g of x is 2x squared. So we're going to be doing it just like we did. We're going to start out that way. So I'm going to put f of x on the bottom, which is negative 3x plus 3. And then g of x is 2x squared. Now on this one, it's not asking us to divide. It only wants to know what the domain is. So if I were to graph this function, if I were to graph it on the xy axis, the coordinate plane, it would look something like this. Of course, this is not going to be perfect, but it looks something like this, because it's a rational. It would basically be a fractional power, and so okay, what this means is, if you look at this graph, if the domain is your x value. That's really, really important. So we're going to be trying to figure out what are all of the possible values of x. If it was asking me about the range, I would want to know what are the possible values of y. The way I always remembered it is D comes before R as X comes before Y. So domain is your X, range is your Y. That's one way to remember, so that you don't get them mixed up. But if you look at the graph, if I'm looking at the X values, notice how it approaches 0, but it doesn't quite reach 0 on the X. It's going up to the left on this right portion, which I'll highlight in yellow. It's going up towards 0 to the left, but it never will reach it. And likewise on the left side. Did I say left earlier? I meant right. The yellow is the right. Okay. Anyway, you know what I mean. So it's approaching 0 on the left side also, but it will also not ever reach it. So 0 is the number that is basically the only possibility where it's not going to work. So, but if you didn't want to do all of that work, you don't really have to, because all you really have to do is take whatever's on the bottom and set that equal to 0 and solve it, just like we did earlier on in the school year. Okay, so first, I want to solve for x, so I would divide both sides by 2. So I'll just do that in this color. So then when I do that, I'm going to end up with x squared equals 0, because 0 divided by 2 is 0. And then, well, I still want to solve for x, so I would just need to take the square root of both sides. That's really all I need to do. So take the square root. And so my final answer here would be x equals 0. But in this case, x equals 0 is the no-no. That would be, if I were to plug 0, if I were to substitute 0 in for x, I would get 2 times 0 squared. 0 squared is 0. 2 times 0 is 0. I can't divide by 0. So my answer on this, my domain So I gotta bring this down some. Basically, here we go. My domain is going to be all real numbers but 0 or except 0. Okay, my domain could be any other number. I could substitute any number I wanted in for x and it would work just fine. Okay, so that first one took a little bit longer, but let's move on to another one. This one won't take quite as long because we kind of know what we're doing now. So on this one, same thing. We're wanting to know domain of f divided by g of x. Oh. Didn't quite fit. Be alright though. Same thing as what we just in the last one. So we have f of x equals negative 5x plus 2. And we have g of x equals 5x plus 3. Alright, so in this one, we want to do the same thing. We're just going to divide. So, I'll set this up as negative 5x plus 2, because that's my f. That goes on the top, over g of x is 5x plus 3. Okay, so that's what we would have if we were dividing it. But it wants to know what the domain would be. So, all we're really going to do is we're going to take this bottom and we're going to set it equal to 0. So I have 5x plus 3 equals 0, because we cannot divide by 0. So if we can find out what number makes it equal to 0, then, well, that'll tell us what number that we cannot have. So on this, we're just going to subtract 3. We're solving this equation. So that's going to give me 5x, and then 3 minus 3 is 0. So 5x equals 0 minus 3 is negative 3. So then on this, now we just need to divide by 5, because that's the opposite of multiplying by 5. So when I do that, I'm going to get 1x equals negative 3 fifths. So I'm going to get a fraction on this, which is perfectly fine. So that means my answer, my domain, and forgive me for my terrible handwriting on this. I'm doing it with my fingers because my stylus don't want to work half the time. My domain is basically all real numbers but except -3/5 or -3/5. That is essentially where -3/5, x equals -3/5, would be the vertical line. It would be a vertical imaginary line that we call an asymptote. And that is simply where we cannot go. Okay? All right, so let's just do one more. Do a couple more like this. And then we're going to do one more where we actually divide. Okay? And so we have on this one, h divided by p of x. And we want to find the domain. I feel like this is a... Okay. All right, so on this one, we have h of x is 5x plus 1. Try to use a stylus. Don't want to work half the time, though. P of x equals x squared minus 7x. Okay. So, same thing. So, we're just going to divide. So, we're going to put 5x plus 1 on the top. And then x squared minus 7x on the bottom. Okay, so we're going to take this bottom. And we're going to see what that magical number is that we cannot have. So, we're going to have x squared minus 7x equals 0. So, on this one, we can factor out an x. So, when I do that, my GCF is x. So, when I do that, it's going to give me x minus 7 in parentheses. So, this is just simply factoring. So, we're going to factor it. So, I get x times x minus 7 equals 0. So, in that case, when you factor, just like when we were finding solutions to quadratics, did tons of that, we're going to just set each part equal to 0. So, I'm going to have x, I'm going to take this, I'm going to set that equal to 0. So, I'm going to say x equals 0. And then, I'm going to also take this part. So, x minus 7 equals 0. So, in that case, I would just add 7. So, I would get x equals positive 7. 0 plus 7 is 7. So, on this one, when I write my answer, zoom back out a little bit. So, on this one, my domain would be all real numbers, but we have two things it can't have. So, it'd be all real numbers, but 0 and 7. All right. So, let's do another one. So, on this one, let's take Q divided by C of X. And we're trying to find the domain. All right, so Q of X, let's say that it is negative x plus 1. And C of x is x squared minus 4. So we're just going to do the same thing we just did in the last problem. So Q is going to go on the top, so I have negative x plus 1 over x squared minus 4. I'm going to see if I can't make that a little better for you. All right, so we're going to be doing the same thing. So we got to figure out what possible values or what value would make this have 0 on the bottom, because we cannot divide by 0. So we're going to look at just our bottom. We don't even have to worry about the top. Top really isn't going to have any effect. So if I have x squared minus 4, I'm just going to take that, and that will actually factor also. Remember, this is what we call difference of squares. Don't you dare forget that. We've done tons of those this year. Because x squared is a perfect square, 4 is a perfect square, and then because of the subtraction between them, I'm taking the difference. So, difference of squares, this is a pretty quick one to factor. So I'm just going to have 2 sets of parentheses. And I'm going to have x and x. X times x gives me x. And then 2 times 2 gives me 4. And then one of them is going to be a plus, and one of them is going to be a minus. Okay. So, when I set both of those equal to 0, which is what we're going to have to do, so I'm going to have x minus 2 equals 0. And then I'm also going to have x plus 2 equals 0. So I need a little bit more room. So let's zoom out just a bit. Just finish this one first. So on this one, I would just subtract 2 from both sides. Oh, my stylus don't work. Imagine that. Minus 2. I prefer using the stylus though because it's a little bit neater. So, but anyway, when I subtract 2, I'm going to get x equals negative 2. And on this one, I need to do the opposite of subtracting 2, which is adding 2. So I'm going to have x equals positive 2. So your domain on this one, so my domain on this one would be all real numbers except 2 and negative 2. And that's really all we can do on that. Okay, so later on, it spices it up just a little bit, okay? And it's going to ask us to actually divide it. But that's actually the easy part. So, it may ask us, what is f divided by g of x? It's not asking us what the domain is this time. It actually really wants us to divide it. So, we're going to do that. And really, it's not really any harder. So, let's say that we have f of x is negative x plus 3. And g of x is 3x squared. So on this one, we're doing f divided by g of x. So just like we've been doing, all I'm really doing on this is I'm just going to put f on the top. So we're going to put f on the top, so negative x plus 3. And on the bottom, we have 3x squared. Now, that's not the full answer, though, because we need to indicate, just like we've been doing, what x cannot equal. Okay? So, what x cannot equal, so I would have this, and then I would do comma, and then I would have to specify that x cannot equal 0. And that's because if I were to set 3x squared equal to 0, I would get that x equals 0. So that means 0 would be the number I would have on the bottom. And that is basically just like we did on this problem here. When I set 2x squared equals 0. Right there. I've got x equals 0. So that's what I basically would do here. And y'all, that really is all there is for this lesson. So I hope that is okay. I hope I made it easier for you. But if you're still having any difficulty, please feel free to contact me via email or comment on this video. But I hope you all have a great day and keep working hard, stay safe, and as always, stay awesome. Goodbye, everybody.